1 Maccabees Introduction. First Maccabees is an apocryphal book found in the Septuagint, LXX, and some Bibles. This reading is taken from the World English Bible, often referred to as the Web Bible. The copyright for the Web Bible is public domain. First Maccabees is found in the Septuagint, often referred to by the Roman numeral L-X-X. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, thought to be written during the 300 years or so period before Christ. The Septuagint was the Bible used by the early Greek-speaking church during the Apostolic time period and later, and is quoted often in the New Testament we are familiar with today. The Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox churches include some or all of the apocryphal books found in the Septuagint in their Old Testament. Not all apocryphal books are in the Septuagint. The following introduction is not found in the Web Bible. The canon of the Old Testament closes out at the book of Malah-kai. There is a silent period in Scripture of about 400 years from Malah-kai to the birth of Christ in the Gospels. However, though the Bible says nothing of this time period, God wasn't asleep. The first book of the Maccabees fills in some of this time, showing how God had kept a watchful eye on Israel and aided the people to give them the ability to keep the land in their charge in preparation for the coming of the Messiah. The Maccabees created the Hasmonean kingdom or dynasty after their successful revolt against the Greeks. As you will see in the story, Israel later became friends and allies of the Roman Empire. This fact sheds some insight on the relationship the Jews had with Rome at the time of Christ. The period of time covered in 1 Maccabees reflects back to time of Alexander the Great, with a focus on the successors of Alexander and their dealings with the Jews, to the beginning of the rise of the Roman Empire, from about 170 BC to 134 BC. Some of the prophecies in the book of Daniel chapter 8 concerning the little horn are shown how they were fulfilled in their first iteration during this time in Antiochus Epiphanes IV. 1 Maccabees chapter 1. It came to pass, after that Alexander the Macedonian, the son of Philip, who came out of the land of Chittim, and struck Darius king of the Persians and Medes, it came to pass, after he had struck him, that he reigned in his stead, in former time, over Greece. And he fought many battles, and won many strongholds, and killed the kings of the earth. And went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of a multitude of nations. And the earth was quiet before him, and he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered together an exceeding strong army, and ruled over countries and nations and principalities, and they became tributary to him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. And he called his servants, which were honorable, which had been brought up with him from his youth, and he divided to them his kingdom, while he was yet alive. And Alexander reigned 12 years, and he died. And his servants bare rule, each one in his place. And they did all put diadems upon themselves after that he was dead, and so did their sons after them many years. And they multiplied evils in the earth. And there came forth out of them a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days came there forth out of Israel transgressors of the law, and persuaded many, saying, Let's go and make a covenant with the Gentiles that are round about us, for since we were parted from them many evils have befallen us. And the saying was good in their eyes. And certain of the people were forward herein and went to the king, and he gave them license to do after the ordinances of the Gentiles. And they built a place of exercise in Jerusalem according to the laws of the Gentiles. And they made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the Gentiles, and sold themselves to do evil. And the kingdom was well ordered in the sight of Antiochus, and he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might reign over the two kingdoms. And he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots, and with elephants, and with horsemen, and with a great navy. And he made war against Ptolemy king of Egypt, and Ptolemy was put to shame before him, and fled, and many fell wounded to death. And they got possession of the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils of Egypt. And Antiochus, after that he had struck Egypt, returned in the 143rd year, and went up against Israel in Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered presumptuously into the sanctuary, and took the golden altar, and the candlestick of the light, and all that pertained thereto, and the table of the show bread, and the cups to pour withal, and the bowls, and the golden censers, and the veil, and the crowns, and the adorning of gold which was on the face of the temple, and he scaled it all off. And he took the silver and the gold and the precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all, he went away into his own land, and he made a great slaughter, and spoke very presumptuously. And there came great mourning upon Israel in every place where they were. And the rulers and elders groaned, the virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of the women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. And the land was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. And after 2 full years the king sent a chief collector of tribute to the cities of Judah, and he came to Jerusalem with a great multitude. And he spoke words of peace to them in subtlety, and they gave him credence. And he fell upon the city suddenly, and struck it very sore, and destroyed much people out of Israel. And he took the spoils of the city, and set it on fire, and pulled down the houses thereof and the walls thereof on every side. And they led captive the women and the children, and the cattle they took in possession. And they built the city of David with a great and strong wall, with strong towers, and it became to them a citadel. And they put there a sinful nation, transgressors of the law, and they strengthened themselves therein. And they stored up arms and food, and gathering together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and they became a sore snare. And it became a place to lie in wait in against the sanctuary, and an evil adversary to Israel continually. And they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled the sanctuary. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, and she became a habitation of strangers, and she became strange to those who were born in her, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness, her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. According to her glory, so was her dishonor multiplied, and her high estate was turned into mourning. And King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that each should forsake his own laws. And all the nations agreed according to the word of the king. And many of Israel consented to his worship, and sacrificed to the idols, and profaned the Sabbath. And the king sent letters by the hand of messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow laws strange to the land, and should forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the sanctuary, and should profane the Sabbaths and feasts, and pollute the sanctuary and those who were holy. That they should build altars, and temples, and shrines for idols, and should sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. And that they should leave their sons uncircumcised, that they should make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, so that they might forget the law, and change all the ordinances. And whoever shall not do according to the word of the king, he shall die. According to all these words wrote he to his whole kingdom, and he appointed overseers over all the people, and he commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice, city by city. And from the people were gathered together to them many, every one that had forsaken the law, and they did evil things in the land. And they made Israel to hide themselves in every place of refuge which they had. And on the 15th day of Chislev, in the 145th year, they built an abomination of desolation upon the altar, and in the cities of Judah on every side they built idol altars. And at the doors of the houses and in the streets they burned incense. And they tore in pieces the books of the law which they found, and set them on fire. And wherever was found with any a book of the covenant, and if any consented to the law, the king's sentence delivered him to death. Thus did they in their might to Israel, to those that were found month by month in the cities. And on the 25th day of the month, they sacrificed upon the idol altar of God. And the women that had circumcised their children they put to death according to the commandment. And they hanged their babes about their necks, and destroyed their houses, and those who had circumcised them. And many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat unclean things. And they chose to die, that they might not be defiled with the meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. And they died. And there came exceeding great wrath upon Israel. 1 Maccabees chapter 2. In those days rose up Mattathias the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, from Jerusalem, and he lived at Modin. And he had 5 sons, John, who was surnamed Gaddis, Simon, who was called Thassi, Judas, who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar, who was called Avron, Jonathan, who was called Aphus. And he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and in Jerusalem. And he said, Woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see the destruction of my people, and the destruction of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was given into the hand of the enemy, the sanctuary into the hand of aliens? Her temple is become as a man that was glorious. Her vessels of glory are carried away into captivity, her infants are slain in her streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation has not inherited her palaces and gotten possession of her spoils? Her adorning is all taken away, instead of a free woman she is become a bondwoman. And, behold, our holy things and our beauty and our glory are laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned them. Wherefore should we live any longer? And Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes, and put on sackcloth, and mourned exceedingly. And the king's officers, that were enforcing the apostasy, came into the city Modin to sacrifice. And many of Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were gathered together. And the king's officers answered and spoke to Mattathias, saying, You are a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and kindred. Now therefore come you first and do the commandment of the king, as all the nations have done, and the men of Judah, and those who remain in Jerusalem. And you and your house shall be in the number of the king's friends, and you and your sons shall be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. And Mattathias answered and said with a loud voice, If all the nations that are in the house of the king's dominion listen to him, to fall away each one from the worship of his fathers, and have made choice to follow his commandments. Yet I and my sons and my kindred will walk in the covenant of our fathers. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not listen to the king's words, to go aside from our worship, on the right hand, or on the left. And when he had left speaking these words, there came a Jew in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. And Mattathias saw it, and his zeal was kindled, and his reins trembled, and he showed forth his wrath according to judgment, and ran, and killed him upon the altar. And the king's officer, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and pulled down the altar. And he was zealous for the law, even as Phinehas did to Zimri the son of Salu. And Mattathias cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, Whosoever is zealous for the law, and maintains the covenant, let him come forth after me. And he and his sons fled into the mountains, and forsook all that they had in the city. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness, to dwell there. They, and their sons, and their wives, and their cattle, because evils were multiplied upon them. And it was told the king's officers, and the forces that were in Jerusalem, the city of David, that certain men, who had broken the king's commandment, were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness. And many pursued after them, and having overtaken them, they encamped against them, and set the battle in array against them on the Sabbath day. And they said to them, Thus far. Come forth, and do according to the word of the king, and you shall live. And they said, We will not come forth, neither will we do the word of the king, to profane the Sabbath day. And they hurried to give them battle. And they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped up the secret places. Saying, Let us die all in our innocency. Heaven and earth witness over us, that you put us to death without trial. And they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they died, they and their wives and their children, and their cattle, to the number of 1,000 souls. And Mattathias and his friends knew it, and they mourned over them exceedingly. And one said to another, If we all do as our kindred have done, and fight not against the Gentiles for our lives and our ordinances, They will now quickly destroy us from off the earth. And they took counsel on that day, saying, whoever shall come against us to battle on the Sabbath day, let's fight against him, and we shall in no wise all die, as our kindred died in the secret places. Then were gathered together to them a company of Hasideans, mighty men of Israel, every one that offered himself willingly for the law. And all those who fled from the evils were added to them, and became a state of them. And they mustered an army, and struck sinners in their anger, and lawless men in their wrath. And the rest fled to the Gentiles for safety. And Mattathias and his friends went round about, and pulled down the altars. And they circumcised by force the children that were uncircumcised, as many as they found in the coasts of Israel. And they pursued after the sons of pride, and the work prospered in their hand. And they rescued the law out of the hand of the Gentiles, and out of the hand of the kings, neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. And the days of Mattathias drew near that he should die, and he said to his sons, now have pride and rebuke gotten strength, and a season of overthrow, and wrath of indignation. And now, my children, be you zealous for the law, and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. And call to remembrance the deeds of our fathers which they did in their generations, and receive great glory and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in temptation, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness? Joseph in the time of his distress kept the commandment, and became Lord of Egypt. Phinehas our father, for that he was zealous exceedingly, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Joshua for fulfilling the word became a judge in Israel. Caleb for bearing witness in the congregation obtained a heritage in the land. David for being merciful inherited the throne of a kingdom forever and ever. Elijah, for that he was exceeding zealous for the law, was taken up into heaven. Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, believed, and were saved out of the flame. Daniel for his innocency was delivered from the mouth of lions. And thus consider you from generation to generation, that none that put their trust in him shall lack for strength. And be not afraid of the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall in no wise be found, because he is returned to his dust, and his thought is perished. And you, my children, be strong, and show yourselves men in behalf of the law, for therein shall you obtain glory. And, behold, Simon your brother, I know that he is a man of counsel, give ear to him always. He shall be a father to you. And Judas Maccabeus, he has been strong and mighty from his youth. He shall be your captain, and shall fight the battle of the people. And take you to you all the doers of the law, and avenge the wrong of your people. Render a recompense to the Gentiles, and take heed to the commandments of the law. And he blessed them, and was gathered to his fathers. And he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchres of his fathers at Madan, and all Israel made great lamentation for him. 1 Maccabees chapter 3. And his son Judas, who was called Maccabeus, rose up in his stead. And all his kindred helped him, and so did all those who clave to his father, and they fought with gladness the battle of Israel. And he got his people great glory, and put on a breastplate as a giant, and girded his warlike harness about him, and set battles in array, protecting the army with his sword. And he was like a lion in his deeds, and as a lion's whelp roaring for prey. And he pursued the lawless, seeking them out, and he burned up those that troubled his people. And the lawless shrunk for fear of him, and all the workers of lawlessness were sore troubled, and salvation prospered in his hand. And he angered many kings, and made Jacob glad with his acts, and his memorial is blessed forever. And he went about among the cities of Judah, and destroyed the ungodly out of the land, and turned away wrath from Israel. And he was renowned to the utmost part of the earth, and he gathered together such as were ready to perish. And Apollonius gathered the Gentiles together, and a great army from Samaria, to fight against Israel. And Judas perceived it, and he went forth to meet him, and struck him, and killed him. And many fell wounded to death, and the rest fled. And they took their spoils, and Judas took the sword of Apollonius, and therewith he fought all his days. And Siran, the commander of the army of Syria, heard say that Judas had gathered a gathering and a congregation of faithful men with him, and of such as went out to war. And he said, I will make myself a name and get me glory in the kingdom, and I will fight against Judas and those who are with him, that said at nothing the word of the king. And there went up with him also a mighty army of the ungodly to help him, to take vengeance on the children of Israel. And he came near to the going up of Betharon, and Judas went forth to meet him with a small company. But when they saw the army coming to meet them, they said to Judas, What? Shall we be able, being a small company, to fight against so great and strong a multitude? And we for our part are faint, having tasted no food this day. And Judas said, It is an easy thing for many to be shut up in the hands of a few, and with heaven it is all one, to save by many or by few. For victory in battle stands not in the multitude of an army, but strength is from heaven. They come to us in fullness of insolence and lawlessness, to destroy us and our wives and our children, for to plunder us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. And he himself will discomfort them before our face. But as for you, be you not afraid of them. Now when he had left off speaking, he leapt suddenly upon them, and Sirin and his army were discomforted before him. And they pursued them in the going down of Betharon to the plain, and there fell of them about 800 men, but the residue fled into the land of the Philistines. And the fear of Judas and his kindred, and the dread of them, began to fall upon the nations round about them. And his name came near even to the king, and every nation told of the battles of Judas. But when King Antiochus heard these words, he was full of indignation. And he sent and gathered together all the forces of his realm, an exceedingly strong army. And he opened his treasury, and gave his forces pay for a year, and commanded them to be ready for every need. And he saw that the money failed from his treasures, and that the tributes of the country were small, because of the dissension and plague which he had brought upon the land, to the end that he might take away the laws which had been from the first days. And he feared that he should not have enough as at other times for the charges and the gifts which he gave aforetime with a liberal hand, and he abounded above the kings that were before him. And he was exceedingly perplexed in his mind, and he determined to go into Persia, and to take the tributes of the countries, and to gather much money. And he left Lysias, an honorable man, and one of the seed royals, to be over the affairs of the king from the river Euphrates to the borders of Egypt. And to bring up his son Antiochus, until he came again. And he delivered to him the half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him charge of all the things that he would have done, and concerning those who lived in Judea and in Jerusalem. That he should send an army against them, to root out and destroy the strength of Israel, and the remnant of Jerusalem, and to take away their memorial from the place. And that he should make strangers dwell on all their coasts, and should divide their land to them by a lot. And the king took the half that remained of the forces, and removed from Antioch, from his royal city, the 147th year, and he passed over the river Euphrates and went through the upper countries. And Lysias chose Ptolemy the son of Dorymenes, and Nicanor, and Gorgias, mighty men of the king's friends. And with them he sent 40,000 footmen, and 7,000 horses, to go into the land of Judah, and to destroy it, according to the word of the king. And they removed with all their army and came and pitched near to Emmaus in the plain country. And the merchants of the country heard the fame of them, and took silver and gold exceedingly much, with fetters, and came into the camp to take the children of Israel for servants. And there were added to them the forces of Syria and of the land of the Philistines. And Judas and his kindred saw that evils were multiplied, and that the forces were encamping in their borders, and they took knowledge of the king's words which he had commanded, to destroy the people and make an end of them. And they said each man to his neighbor, Let's raise up the ruin of our people, and let's fight for our people in the holy place. And the congregation was gathered together, that they might be ready for battle, and that they might pray, and ask for mercy and compassion. And Jerusalem was without inhabitant as a wilderness, there was none of her offspring that went in or went out, and the sanctuary was trodden down, and the sons of strangers were in the citadel, the Gentiles lodged therein, and joy was taken away from Jacob, and the pipe and the harp ceased. And they gathered themselves together, and came to Mizpah, near Jerusalem, for in Mizpah was there a place of prayer aforetime for Israel. And they fasted that day, and put on sackcloth, and put ashes upon their heads, and tore their clothes. and laid open the book of the law, concerning which the Gentiles were wont to inquire, seeking the likenesses of their idols. And they brought the priest's garments, and the first fruits, and the tithes. And they stirred up the Nazarites, who had accomplished their days. And they cried aloud toward heaven, saying, What shall we do with these men, and whither shall we carry them away? And your holy place is trodden down and profaned, and your priests are in heaviness and brought low. And behold, the Gentiles are assembled together against us to destroy us. You know what things they imagine against us. How shall we be able to stand before them, except you be our help? And they sounded trumpets and cried with a loud voice. And after this Judas appointed leaders of the people, captains of thousands, and captains of hundreds, and captains of fifties, and captains of tens. And he said to those who were building houses, and were betrothing wives, and were planting vineyards, and were fearful, that they should return, each man to his own house, according to the law. And the army removed and encamped upon the south side of Emmaus. And Judas said, Gird yourselves, and be valiant men, and be in readiness against a morning, that you may fight with these Gentiles, that are assembled together against us to destroy us, and our holy place. For it is better for us to die in battle, than to look upon the evils of our nation and the holy place. Nevertheless, as may be the will in heaven, so shall he do. 1 Maccabees chapter 4. And Gorgias took 5,000 footmen, and 1,000 chosen horse, and the army removed by night, that it might fall upon the army of the Jews and strike them suddenly. And the men of the citadel were his guides. And Judas heard thereof, and removed, he and the valiant men, that he might strike the king's army which was at Emmaus, while as yet the forces were dispersed from the camp. And Gorgias came into the camp of Judas by night and found no man, and he sought them in the mountains, for he said, These men flee from us. And as soon as it was day, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men. Howbeit they had not armor nor swords to their minds. And they saw the camp of the Gentiles strong and fortified, and horsemen compassing it round about, and these were expert in war. And Judas said to the men that were with him, Fear you not their multitude, neither be you afraid of their onset. Remember how our fathers were saved in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh pursued them with an army. And now let's cry to heaven, if he will have us, and will remember the covenant of our fathers, and destroy this army before our face today. And all the Gentiles shall know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel. And the strangers lifted up their eyes, and saw them coming near them. And they went out of the camp to battle. And those who were with Judas sounded their trumpets, and joined battle, and the Gentiles were discomforted, and fled into the plain. But all the hindmost fell by the sword. And they pursued them to Gazara, and to the plains of Idumea and Azotus and Jamnia, and there fell of them about 3,000 men. And Judas and his army returned from pursuing after them. And he said to the people, Be not greedy of the spoils, inasmuch as there is a battle before us. And Gorgias and his army are near to us in the mountain. But stand you now against our enemies, and fight against them, and afterwards take the spoils with boldness. While Judas was yet making an end of these words, there appeared a part of them looking out from the mountain. And they saw that their army had been put to flight, and that the Jews were burning the camp, for the smoke that was seen declared what was done. But when they perceived these things, they were sore afraid, and also perceiving the army of Judas in the plain ready for battle, they fled all of them into the land of the Philistines. And Judas returned to plunder the camp, and they got much gold, and silver, and blue, and sea purple, and great riches. And they returned home, and sang a song of thanksgiving, and gave praise to heaven, because his mercy is good, because his mercy endures forever. And Israel had a great deliverance that day. But the strangers, as many as had escaped, came, and told Lysias all the things that had happened. But when he heard thereof, he was confounded and discouraged, because neither had such things as he would been done to Israel, nor had such things as the king commanded him come to pass. And in the next year he gathered together 70,000 chosen footmen, and 5,000 horses, that he might subdue them. And they came into Idumea and encamped at Bethsura, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. And he saw that the army was strong, and he prayed and said, "Blessed are you, O Savior of Israel, who did quell the onset of the mighty man by the hand of your servant David, and did deliver the army of the Philistines into the hands of Jonathan the son of Saul, and of his armor-bearer. Shut up this army in the hand of your people Israel, and let them be ashamed for their army and their horsemen. Give them faintness of heart, and cause the boldness of their strength to melt away, and let them quake at their destruction. Cast them down with the sword of those who love you, and let all that know your name praise you with thanksgiving." And they joined battle, and there fell of the army of Lysias about 5,000 men, and they fell down near them. But when Lysias saw that his array was put to flight, and the boldness that had come upon those who were with Judas, and how they were ready either to live or to die nobly, he removed to Antioch, and gathered together hired soldiers, that he might come again into Judea with even a greater company. But Judas and his kindred said, "Behold, our enemies are discomforted. Let's go up to cleanse the holy place, and to dedicate it afresh." And all the army was gathered together, and they went up to Mount Sion. And they saw the sanctuary laid desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest or as on one of the mountains, and the priests' chambers pulled down. And they tore their clothes, and made great lamentation, and put ashes upon their heads, and fell on their faces to the ground, and blew with the solemn trumpets, and cried toward heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the citadel, until he should have cleansed the holy place. And he chose blameless priests, such as had pleasure in the law. And they cleansed the holy place and took out the stones of defilement into an unclean place. And they took counsel concerning the altar of burnt offerings, which had been profaned, what they should do with it. And there came into their mind a good counsel, that they should pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the Gentiles had defiled it. And they pulled down the altar, and laid up the stones in the mountain of the house in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to give an answer concerning them. And they took whole stones according to the law, and built a new altar after the fashion of the former. And they built the holy place, and the inner parts of the house, and they hallowed the courts. And they made the holy vessels new, and they brought the candlestick, and the altar of burnt offerings and of incense, and the table, into the temple. And they burned incense upon the altar, and they lighted the lamps that were upon the candlestick, and they gave light in the temple. And they set loaves upon the table, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they made. And they rose up early in the morning, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month Chislev, in the 148th year. And offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. At what time and on what day the Gentiles had profaned it, even on that day was it dedicated afresh, with songs and harps and lutes, and with cymbals. And all the people fell upon their faces, and worshipped, and gave praise to heaven, which had given them good success. And they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed a sacrifice of deliverance and praise. And they decked the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and small shields, and dedicated afresh the gates and the priests' chambers, and made doors for them. And there was exceeding great gladness among the people, and the reproach of the Gentiles was turned away. And Judas and his kindred and the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their seasons from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Chislev, with gladness and joy. And at that season they built up the Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest haply the Gentiles should come and tread them down, as they had done aforetime. And he set there a force to keep it, and they fortified Bethsura to keep it, that the people might have a stronghold near Idumea. 1 Maccabees chapter 5. And it came to pass, when the Gentiles round about heard that the altar was built, and the sanctuary dedicated as aforetime, they were exceeding angry. And they took counsel to destroy the race of Jacob that was in the midst of them, and they began to kill and destroy among the people. And Judas fought against the children of Eah and Idumea at Acrabattene, because they besieged Israel. And he struck them with a great slaughter, and brought down their pride, and took their spoils. And he remembered the wickedness of the children of Bean, who were to the people a snare and a stumbling block, lying in wait for them in the ways. And they were shut up by him in the towers, and he encamped against them, and destroyed them utterly, and burned with fire the towers of the place, with all that were therein. And he passed over to the children of Ammon, and found a mighty band, and many people, with Timotheus for their leader. And he fought many battles with them, and they were discomforted before his face, and he struck them. And got possession of Jazer, and the villages thereof, and returned again into Judea. And the Gentiles that were in Gilead gathered themselves together against the Israelites that were on their borders, to destroy them. And they fled to the stronghold of Dithema. And sent letters to Judas and his kindred, saying, The Gentiles that are round about us are gathered together against us to destroy us. And they are preparing to come and get possession of the stronghold whereunto we are fled for refuge, and Timotheus is the leader of their army. Now therefore come and deliver us from their hand, for many of us have fallen. And all our kindred that were in the land of Tobias have been put to death, and they have carried into captivity their wives and their children and their stuff, and they destroyed there about 1,000 men. While the letters were yet reading, behold, there came other messengers from Galilee with their clothes tore, bringing a report after this wise, saying, that there were gathered together against them those of Ptolemais, and of Tyre, and of Sidon, and all Galilee of the Gentiles to consume them. Now when Judas and the people heard these words, they assembled together a great congregation, to consult what they should do for their kindred, that were in tribulation, and were assaulted of them. And Judas said to Simon his brother, Choose you out men, and go and deliver your kindred that are in Galilee, but I and Jonathan my brother will go into the land of Gilead. And he left Joseph the son of Zacharias, and Azarias, as leaders of the people, with the remnant of the army, in Judea, to keep it. And he gave commandment to them, saying, Take you the charge of this people, and fight no battle with the Gentiles until that we come again. And to Simon were divided 3,000 men to go into Galilee, but to Judas, 8,000 men to go into the land of Gilead. And Simon went into Galilee, and fought many battles with the Gentiles, and the Gentiles were discomforted before him. And he pursued them to the gate of Ptolemais, and there fell of the Gentiles about 3,000 men, and he took their spoils. And they took to them those that were in Galilee, and in Arabata, with their wives and their children, and all that they had, and brought them into Judea with great gladness. And Judas Maccabeus and his brother Jonathan passed over Jordan, and went 3 days' journey in the wilderness. And they met with the Nabathians, and these met them in a peaceful manner, and told them all things that had befallen their kindred in the land of Gilead. And how that many of them were shut up in Bozrah, and Bozer, and Alima, Casphar, Maked, and Karnaim, all these cities are strong and great. And how that they were shut up in the rest of the cities of the land of Gilead, and that tomorrow they have appointed to encamp against the strongholds, and to take them, and to destroy all these men in one day. And Judas and his army turned suddenly by the way of the wilderness to Bozrah, and he took the city and killed all the males with the edge of the sword, and took all their spoils, and burned the city with fire. And he removed from thence by night and went till he came to the stronghold. And the morning came, and they lifted up their eyes, and behold, many people which could not be counted, bearing ladders and engines of war, to take the stronghold, and they were fighting against them. And Judas saw that the battle was begun, and that the cry of the city went up to heaven, with trumpets and a great sound. And he said to the men of his army, Fight this day for your kindred. And he went forth behind them in 3 companies, and they sounded with their trumpets, and cried out in prayer. And the army of Timotheus perceived that it was Maccabeus, and they fled from before him. And he struck them with a great slaughter, and there fell of them on that day about 8,000 men. And he turned away to Mizpah and fought against it, and took it, and killed all the males thereof, and took the spoils thereof, and burned it with fire. From thence he removed and took Casphar, Maked, Bozer, and the other cities of the land of Gilead. Now after these things Timotheus gathered another army and encamped near Raphan beyond the brook. And Judas sent men to spy on the army, and they brought him word, saying, All the Gentiles that be round about us are gathered together to them, an exceeding great army. And they have hired Arabians to help them, and are encamping beyond the brook, ready to come against you to battle. And Judas went to meet them. And Timotheus said to the captains of his army, when Judas and his army drew near to the brook of water, If he passes over first to us, we shall not be able to withstand him, for he will mightily prevail against us. But if he is afraid and encamp beyond the river, we will cross over to him and prevail against him. Now when Judas came near to the brook of water, he caused the scribes of the people to remain by the brook, and gave commandment to them, saying, Suffer no man to encamp, but let all come to the battle. And he crossed over the first against them, and all the people after him. And all the Gentiles were discomforted before his face, and cast away their arms, and fled to the temple at Carnaim. And they took the city, and burned the temple with fire, together with all that was therein. And Carnaim was subdued, neither could they stand any longer before the face of Judas. And Judas gathered together all Israel, those who were in the land of Gilead, from the least to the greatest, and their wives, and their children, and their stuff, an exceeding great army, that they might come into the land of Judah. And they came as far as Ephron, and this same city was great, and it was in the way as they should go, exceeding strong. They could not turn away from it on the right hand or on the left, but must needs pass through the midst of it. And they of the city shut them out and stopped up the gates with stones. And Judas sent to them with words of peace, saying, We will pass through your land to go into our own land, and none shall do you any hurt, we will only pass by on our feet. And they would not open to him. And Judas commanded proclamation to be made in the army, that each man should encamp in the place where he was. And the men of the army encamped, and fought against the city all that day and all that night, and the city was delivered into his hands. And he destroyed all the males with the edge of the sword, and razed the city, and took the spoils thereof, and passed through the city over those who were slain. And they went over Jordan into the great plain near Bethshan. And Judas gathered together those that lagged behind, and encouraged the people all the way through, until he came into the land of Judah. And they went up to Mount Sion with gladness and joy, and offered whole burnt offerings, because not so much as one of them was slain until they returned in peace. And in the days when Judas and Jonathan were in the land of Gilead, and Simon his brother in Galilee before Ptolemais, Joseph the son of Zacharias and Azarias, rulers of the army, heard of their exploits and of the war, what things they had done. And they said, Let's also get us a name, and let's go fight against the Gentiles that are around us. And they gave charge to the men of the army that was with them and went toward Jamnia. And Gorgias and his men came out of the city to meet them in battle. And Joseph and Azarias were put to flight and were pursued to the borders of Judea. And there fell on that day of the people of Israel about 2,000 men. And there was a great overthrow among the people because they didn't listen to Judas and his kindred, thinking to do some exploitation. But they were not of the seed of those men, by whose hand deliverance was given to Israel. And the man Judas and his kindred were glorified exceedingly in the sight of all Israel, and of all the Gentiles, wherever their name was heard of. And men gathered together to them, acclaiming them. And Judas and his kindred went forth and fought against the children of Esau in the land toward the south, and he struck Hebron and the villages thereof, and pulled down the strongholds thereof, and burned the towers thereof round about. And he removed to go into the land of the Philistines, and he went through Samaria. In that day certain priests, desiring to do exploits there, were slain in battle, when as he went out to battle unadvisedly. And Judas turned toward Azotus, to the land of the Philistines, and pulled down their altars, and burned the carved images of their gods with fire, and took the plunder of their cities, and returned into the land of Judah. 1 Maccabees chapter 6. And King Antiochus was journeying through the upper countries, and he heard say that in Elymas, in Persia, there was a city renowned for riches, for silver and gold. And that the temple which was in it was rich exceedingly, and that therein were golden shields, and breastplates, and arms, which Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian king, who reigned first among the Greeks, left behind there. And he came and sought to take the city, and to pillage it, and he was not able, because the thing was known to them of the city. And they rose up against him to battle, and he fled, and removed thence with great heaviness, to return to Babylon. And there came one bringing him tidings into Persia, that the armies, which went against the land of Judah, had been put to flight. And that Lysias went first with a strong army, and was put to shame before them, and that they had waxed strong by reason of arms and power, and with store of spoils, which they took from the armies that they had cut off. And that they had pulled down the abomination which he had built upon the altar that was in Jerusalem, and that they had compassed about the sanctuary with high walls, as before, and Bethsura, his city. And it came to pass, when the king heard these words, he was astonished and moved exceedingly. And he laid him down upon his bed, and fell sick for grief, because it had not befallen him as he looked for. And he was there many days, because great grief was renewed upon him, and he made account that he should die. And he called for all his friends, and said to them, Sleep departs from my eyes, and my heart fails for care. And I said in my heart, To what tribulation am I come, and how great a flood is it, wherein I now am? For I was gracious and beloved in my power. But now I remember the evils which I did at Jerusalem, and that I took all the vessels of silver and gold that were therein and sent forth to destroy the inhabitants of Judah without a cause. I perceive that on this account these evils have come upon me, and behold, I perish through great grief in a strange land. And he called for Philip, one of his friends, and set him over all his kingdom. And gave him his diadem, and his robe, and his signet ring, to the end he should bring Antiochus his son, and nourish him up that he might be king. And King Antiochus died there in the 149th year. And Lysias knew that the king was dead, and he set up Antiochus his son to reign, whom he had nourished up being young, and he called his name Eupator. And those who were in the citadel shut up Israel round about the sanctuary, and saw it all was their hurt, and the strengthening of the Gentiles. And Judas thought to destroy them, and called all the people together to besiege them. And they were gathered together, and besieged them in the 150th year, and he made mounds to shoot from, and engines of war. And there came forth some of those who were shut up, and there were joined to them certain ungodly men of Israel. And they went to the king, and said, How long will you not execute judgment, and avenge our kindred? We were willing to serve your father, and to walk after his words, and to follow his commandments. And for this cause the children of our people besieged the citadel, and were alienated from us, but as many of us as they could light on they killed, and plundered our inheritances. And not against us only did they stretch out their hand, but also against all their borders. And behold, they are encamped this day against the citadel at Jerusalem, to take it. And the sanctuary and Bethsura have they fortified. And if you are not beforehand with them quickly, they will do greater things than these, and you shall not be able to control them. And when the king heard this, he was angry, and gathered together all his friends, even the rulers of his army, and those who were over the horse. And there came to him from other kingdoms, and from isles of the sea, bands of hired soldiers. And the number of his forces was 100,000 footmen, and 20,000 horsemen, and 32 elephants trained for war. And they went through Idumea, and encamped against Bethsura, and fought against it many days, and made engines of war, and they of Bethsura came out, and burned them with fire, and fought valiantly. And Judas removed from the citadel, and encamped at Bethzacharias, near the king's camp. And the king rose early in the morning and removed his army at full speed along the road to Bethzacharias, and his forces made them ready to battle, and sounded with the trumpets. And they showed the elephants the blood of grapes and mulberries, that they might prepare them for the battle. And they divided the beasts among the phalanxes, and they set by each elephant 1,000 men armed with coats of mail and helmets of brass on their heads, and for each beast were appointed 500 chosen horsemen. These were ready beforehand, wherever the beast was, and wherever the beast went, they went with him, they departed not from him. And towers of wood were upon them, strong and covered, one upon each beast, girded fast upon him with cunning contrivances, and upon each beast were 32 valiant men that fought upon them, beside his Indian. And the residue of the horsemen he set on this side and that side at the two parts of the army, striking terror into the enemy, and protected by the phalanxes. Now when the sun shone upon the shields of gold and brass, the mountains shone therewith, and blazed like torches of fire. And a part of the king's army was spread upon the high mountains, and some on the low ground, and they went on firmly and in order. And all that heard the noise of their multitude, and the marching of the multitude, and the rattling of the arms, did quake. For the army was exceeding great and strong. And Judas and his army drew near for battle, and there fell of the king's army 600 men. And Eleazar, who was called Avron, saw one of the beasts armed with royal breastplates, and he was higher than all the beasts, and the king seemed to be upon him. And he gave himself to deliver his people, and to get him an everlasting name. And he ran upon him courageously into the midst of the phalanx and killed on the right hand and on the left, and they parted asunder from him on this side and on that. And he crept under the elephant, and thrust him from beneath, and killed him, and the elephant fell to the earth upon him, and he died there. And they saw the strength of the kingdom, and the fierce onset of the army, and turned away from them. But they of the king's army went up to Jerusalem to meet them, and the king encamped toward Judea, and toward Mount Sion. And he made peace with them of Bethsura, and he came out of the city, because they had no food there to endure the siege, because it was a Sabbath to the land. And the king took Bethsura and appointed a garrison there to keep it. And he encamped against the sanctuary for many days, and created mounds to shoot from, and engines of war, and instruments for casting fire and stones, and pieces to cast darts, and slings. And they also made war engines against their war engines and fought for many days. But there was no food in the sanctuary, because it was the 7th year, and those who fled for safety into Judea from among the Gentiles had eaten up the residue of the store. And there were but a few left in the sanctuary, because the famine prevailed against them, and they were scattered, each man to his own place. And Lysias heard say that Philip, whom Antiochus the king, whiles he was yet alive, appointed to nourish up his son Antiochus, that he might be king, was returned from Persia and Media, and with him the forces that went with the king, and that he was seeking to take to him the government. And he made haste, and gave consent to depart. And he said to the king and the leaders of the army and to the men, we decay daily, and our food is scant, and the place where we encamp is strong, and the affairs of the kingdom lie upon us. Now therefore let's give the right hand to these men, and make peace with them, and with all their nation. And covenant with them, that they shall walk after their own laws, as aforetime. For because of their laws which we abolished they were angered and did all these things. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and he sent to them to make peace, and they accepted thereof. And the king and the princes swore to them. Thereupon they came forth from the stronghold. And the king entered into Mount Sion, and he saw the strength of the place, and set at nothing the oath which he had sworn, and gave commandment to pull down the wall round about. And he removed in haste, and returned to Antioch, and found Philip master of the city. And he fought against him and took the city by force. 1 Maccabees chapter 7. In the 151 year Demetrius the son of Seleucus came forth from Rome, and went up with a few men to a city by the sea, and reigned there. And it came to pass, when he would go into the house of the kingdom of his fathers, that the army laid hands on Antiochus and Lysias, to bring them to him. And the thing was known to him, and he said, show me not their faces. And the army killed them. And Demetrius sat upon the throne of his kingdom. And there came to him all the lawless and ungodly men of Israel, and Alcimus was their leader, desiring to be high priest. And they accused the people to the king, saying, Judas and his kindred have destroyed all your friends, and have scattered us from our own land. Now therefore send a man whom you trust, and let him go and see all the havoc which he has made of us, and of the king's country, and how he has punished them, and all that help them." And the king chose Bacchides, one of the king's friends, who was ruler in the country beyond the river, and was a great man in the kingdom, and faithful to the king. And he sent him, and that ungodly Alcimus, and made sure to him the high priesthood, and he commanded him to take vengeance upon the children of Israel. And they removed, and came with a great army into the land of Judah, and he sent messengers to Judas and his kindred with words of peace deceitfully. And they gave no heed to their words, for they saw that they were come with a great army. And there were gathered together to Alcimus and Bacchides a company of scribes, to seek for justice. And the Hasideans were the first among the children of Israel that sought peace of them. For they said, "One that is a priest of the seed of Aaron is come with the forces, and he will do us no wrong." And he spoke with them words of peace, and swore to them, saying, "We will seek the hurt neither of you nor your friends." And they gave him credence. And he laid hands on 60 men of them, and killed them in one day, according to the word which the psalmist wrote. "The flesh of your saints did they cast out, and their blood did they shed round about Jerusalem, and there was no man to bury them. And the fear and the dread of them fell upon all the people, for they said, There is neither truth nor judgment in them, for they have broken the covenant and the oath which they swore." And Bacchides removed from Jerusalem, and encamped in Bezeth, and he sent and took away many of the deserters that were with him, and certain of the people, and he killed them, and cast them into the great pit. And he made sure the country to Alcimus, and left with him a force to aid him, and Bacchides went away to the king. And Alcimus strove for his high priesthood. And there were gathered to him all those who troubled their people, and they got the mastery of the land of Judah, and did great hurt in Israel. And Judas saw all the mischief that Alcimus and his company had done among the children of Israel, even above the Gentiles. And he went out into all the coasts of Judea round about, and took vengeance on the men that had deserted from him, and they were restrained from going forth into the country. But when Alcimus saw that Judas and his company waxed strong, and knew that he was not able to withstand them, he returned to the king, and brought evil accusations against them. And the king sent Nicanor, one of his honorable princes, a man that hated Israel and was their enemy, and commanded him to destroy the people. And Nicanor came to Jerusalem with a great army, and he sent to Judas and his kindred deceitfully with words of peace, saying, "Let there be no battle between me and you, I will come with a few men, that I may see your faces in peace." And he came to Judas, and they saluted one another peaceably. And the enemies were ready to take away Judas by violence. And the thing was known to Judas, to wit, that he came to him with deceit, and he was sore afraid of him, and would see his face no more. And Nicanor knew that his counsel was discovered, and he went out to meet Judas in battle beside Capharsalama. And there fell of Nicanor's side about 500 men, and they fled into the city of David. And after these things Nicanor went up to Mount Sion. And there came some of the priests out of the sanctuary, and some of the elders of the people, to salute him peaceably, and to show him the whole burnt sacrifice that was being offered for the king. And he mocked them, and laughed at them, and entreated them shamefully, and spoke haughtily. And swore in a rage, saying, "Unless Judas and his army be now delivered into my hands, it shall be that, if I come again in peace, I will burn up this house." And he went out in a great rage. And the priests entered in, and stood before the altar in the temple, and they wept, and said, "You did choose this house to be called by your name, to be a house of prayer and supplication for your people. Take vengeance on this man and his army, and let them fall by the sword. Remember their blasphemies, and suffer them not to live any longer." And Nicanor went forth from Jerusalem, and encamped in Betharan, and there met him the army of Syria. And Judas encamped in Adasa with 3,000 men. And Judas prayed and said, "When those who came from the king blasphemed, your angel went out, and struck among them 185,000. Even so discomfort you this army before us today, and let all the rest know that he has spoken wickedly against your sanctuary, and judge you him according to his wickedness." And on the 13th day of the month Adar the armies joined battle. and Nicanor's army was discomforted, and he himself was the first to fall in the battle. Now when his army saw that Nicanor was fallen, they cast away their arms and fled. And they pursued after them a day's journey from Adasa until you come to Gazara, and they sounded an alarm after them with the solemn trumpets. And they came forth out of all the villages of Judea round about, and closed them in, and these turned them back on those, and they all fell by the sword, and there was not one of them left. And they took the spoils and the booty, and they struck off Nicanor's head and his right hand, which he stretched out so haughtily, and brought them, and hanged them up beside Jerusalem. And the people were exceeding glad, and they kept that day as a day of great gladness. And they ordained to keep this day year by year, to wit, the 13th day of Adar. And the land of Judah had rest a little while. 1 Maccabees chapter 8. And Judas heard of the fame of the Romans, that they are valiant men, and have pleasure in all that join themselves to them, and make friends with all such as come to them. And that they are valiant men. And they told him of their wars and exploits which they do among the Gauls, and how that they conquered them, and brought them under tribute. And what things they did in the land of Spain, that they might become masters of the mines of silver and gold which were there. And how that by their policy and persistence, they conquered all the place, and the place was exceedingly far from them, and the kings that came against them from the uttermost part of the earth, until they had discomforted them, and struck them very sore, and how the rest give them tribute year by year. And Philip and Perseus, king of Chittim, and those who lifted up themselves against them, did they discomfort in battle, and conquered them. Antiochus also, the great king of Asia, who came against them to battle, having 120 elephants, with horse and chariots, and an exceeding great army, and he was discomforted by them. And they took him alive, and appointed that both he and such as reigned after him should give them a great tribute, and should give hostages, and a parcel of land, to wit, the country of India and Media and Lydia, and of the goodliest of their countries, and they took them from him, and gave them to King Eumenes. And how they of Greece took counsel to come and destroy them. And the thing was known to them, and they sent against them a captain, and fought against them, and many of them fell down wounded to death, and they made captive their wives and their children, and plundered them, and conquered their land, and pulled down their strongholds, and plundered them, and brought them into bondage to this day. And the residue of the kingdoms and of the isles, as many as rose up against them at any time, they destroyed and made them to be their servants. But with their friends and such as relied upon them they stayed friends, and they conquered the kingdoms that were near and those that were far off, and all that heard of their fame were afraid of them. Moreover, whoever they want to help to make kings, these they do make kings, and whoever they want, they depose, and they are exalted exceedingly. And for all this none of them did ever put on a diadem, neither did they clothe themselves with purple, to be magnified thereby. And how they had made for themselves a senate house, and day by day 320 men sat in council, consulting always for the people, to the end they might be well ordered. And how they commit their government to one man year by year, that he should rule over them, and be lord over all their country, and all are obedient to that one, and there is neither envy nor emulation among them. And Judas chose Eupolemus the son of John, the son of Achos, and Jason the son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome, to establish friendship and alliance with them. And that they should take the yoke from them, for they saw that the kingdom of the Greeks did keep Israel in bondage. And they went to Rome, and the way was exceedingly long, and they entered into the senate house, and answered and said, Judas, who is also called Maccabeus, and his kindred, and the people of the Jews, have sent us to you, to make a confederacy and peace with you, and that we might be registered your confederates and friends. And the thing was well pleasing in their sight. And this is the copy of the writing which they wrote back again on tables of brass, and sent to Jerusalem, that it might be with them there for a memorial of peace and confederacy. Good success be to the Romans, and to the nation of the Jews, by sea and by land forever. The sword also and the enemy be far from them. But if war arise for Rome first, or any of their confederates in all their dominion, the nation of the Jews shall help them as confederates, as the occasion shall prescribe to them, with all their heart. And to those who make war upon them they shall not give, neither supply, food, arms, money, or ships, as it has seemed good to Rome, and they shall keep their ordinances without taking anything, therefore. In the same manner, moreover, if war come first upon the nation of the Jews, the Romans shall help them as confederates with all their soul, as the occasion shall prescribe to them. And to those who are confederates with their foes, there shall not be given food, arms, money, or ships, as it has seemed good to Rome, and they shall keep these ordinances, and that without deceit. According to these words have the Romans made a covenant thus with the people of the Jews. But if hereafter the one party and the other shall take counsel to add or diminish anything, they shall do it at their pleasure, and whatever they shall add or take away shall be established. And as touching the evils which King Demetrius does to them, we have written to him, saying, Wherefore have you made your yoke heavy upon our friends and confederates the Jews? If therefore they plead any more against you, we will do them justice, and fight with you by sea and by land. Maccabees chapter 9. Demetrius heard that Nicanor had fallen with his forces in battle, and he sent Bacchides and Alcimus again into the land of Judah a second time, and the right wing of his army with them. They went by the way that leads to Gilgal, and encamped against Mesoleth, which is in Arbela, and took possession of it, and killed many people. The first month of the 152nd year, they encamped against Jerusalem. Then they marched away and went to Berea with 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalries. Judas was encamped at Elasa with 3,000 chosen men. They saw the multitude of the forces, that they were many, and they were terrified. Many slipped away out of the army. There were not left of them more than 800 men. Judas saw that his army slipped away, and that the battle pressed upon him, and he was very troubled in spirit, because he had no time to gather them together, and he became faint. He said to those who were left, Let's arise and go up against our adversaries, if perhaps we may be able to fight with them. They tried to dissuade him, saying, There is no way we are able, but let's rather save our lives now. Let's return again with our kindred and fight against them, but we are too few. Judas said, Let it not be so that I should do this thing, to flee from them. If our time has come, let's die in a manly way for our kindred's sake, and not leave a cause of reproach against our honor. The army marched out from the camp and stood to encounter them. The cavalry was divided into 2 companies, and the slingers and the archers went before the army, and all the mighty men that fought in the front of the battle. Bacchides was in the right wing. The phalanx advanced on the 2 parts, and they blew with their trumpets. The men by Judas's side sounded with their trumpets, and the earth shook with the shout of the armies, and the battle was joined and continued from morning until evening. Judas saw that Bacchides and the strength of his army were on the right side, and all that were brave in heart went with him, and the right wing was defeated by them, and he pursued after them to the Mount Azotus. Those who were on the left wing saw that the right wing was defeated, and they turned and followed in the footsteps of Judas and of those who were with him. The battle became desperate, and many on both sides fell wounded to death. Judas fell, and the rest fled. Jonathan and Simon took Judas, their brother, and buried him in the tomb of his ancestors at Modin. They wept for him. All Israel made great lamentation for him, and mourned many days, and said, How is the mighty fallen, the Savior of Israel? The rest of the acts of Judas, and his wars, and the valiant deeds which he did, and his greatness, are not written, for they were exceedingly many. It came to pass after the death of Judas, that the lawless emerged within all the borders of Israel. All those who did iniquity rose up. In those days there was an exceedingly great famine, and the country went over to their side. Bacchides chose the ungodly men and made them rulers of the country. They inquired and searched for the friends of Judas, and brought them to Bacchides, and he took vengeance on them and used them despitefully. There was great suffering in Israel, such as was not since the time prophets stopped appearing to them. All the friends of Judas were gathered together, and they said to Jonathan, Since your brother Judas has died, we have no man like him to go out against our enemies in Bacchides, and among those of our nation who hate us. Now therefore we have chosen you this day to be our prince and leader in his place, that you may fight our battles. So, Jonathan took the governance upon him at that time, and rose up in the place of his brother Judas. When Bacchides found out, he tried to kill him. Jonathan and Simon his brother and all who were with him knew it, and they fled into the wilderness of Tekoa and encamped by the water of the pool of Asphar. Bacchides found this out on the Sabbath day, and came he and all his army over the Jordan. Jonathan sent his brother, a leader of the multitude, and implored his friends, the Nabathians, that they might store their baggage, which was much, with them. The children of Jambri came out of Medaba and seized John and all that he had, and went their way with it. But after these things, they brought word to Jonathan and Simon, his brother, that the children of Jambri were celebrating a great wedding and were bringing the bride, a daughter of one of the great nobles of Canaan, from Nadabath with a large escort. They remembered John their brother and went up and hid themselves under the cover of the mountain. They lifted up their eyes and looked and saw a great procession with much baggage. The bridegroom came out with his friends and his kindred to meet them with timbrels, musicians, and many weapons. They rose up against them from their ambush and killed them, and many fell wounded to death. The remnant fled into the mountain, and the Jews took all their spoils. So, the wedding was turned into mourning, and the voice of their musicians into lamentation. They avenged fully the blood of their brother and turned back to the marshes of the Jordan. Bacchides heard it, and he came on the Sabbath day to the banks of Jordan with a great army. Jonathan said to his company, "Let's stand up now and fight for our lives, for things are different today than they were yesterday and the day before. For, behold, the battle is before us and behind us. Moreover, the water of the Jordan is on this side and on that side, and marsh and thicket. There is no place to escape. Now therefore cry to heaven, that you may be delivered out of the hand of your enemies." So, the battle was joined, and Jonathan stretched out his hand to strike Bacchides, and he turned away back from him. Jonathan and those who were with him leapt into the Jordan and swam over to the other side. The enemy didn't pass over the Jordan against them. About 1,000 men of Bacchides' company fell that day, and he returned to Jerusalem. They built strong cities in Judea, the stronghold that was in Jericho, and Maas, Betharan, Bethel, Timnath, Pharathan, and Tephan, with high walls and gates and bars. He set garrisons in them to harass Israel. He fortified the city Bethsura, Gazara, and the citadel, and put troops and stores of food in them. He took the sons of the chief men of the country for hostages and put them under guard in the citadel at Jerusalem. And in the 153rd year, in the 2nd month, Alcimus gave orders to pull down the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary. He also pulled down the works of the prophets. He began to pull down. At that time was Alcimus stricken, and his works were hindered, and his mouth was stopped, and he was taken with a palsy, and he could no longer speak anything and give orders concerning his house. Alcimus died at that time with great torment. Bacchides saw that Alcimus was dead, and he returned to the king. Then the land of Judah had rest for 2 years. Then all the lawless men took counsel, saying, "Behold, Jonathan and his men are dwelling at ease and in security. Now therefore we will bring Bacchides, and he will capture them all in one night." They went and consulted with him. He marched out and came with a great army and sent letters secretly to all his allies who were in Judea, that they should seize Jonathan and those who were with him, but they couldn't, because their plan was known to them. Jonathan's men seized about 50 of the men of the country who were authors of the wickedness, and he killed them. Jonathan, Simon, and those who were with him went away to Bethbasi, which is in the wilderness, and he built up that which had been pulled down, and they made it strong. Bacchides found out about it, and he gathered together all his multitude and sent orders to those who were of Judea. He went and encamped Bethbasi and fought against it for many days and made engines of war. Jonathan left his brother Simon in the city and went out into the country, and he went with a few men. He struck Otamara and his kindred and the children of Phozirn in their tents. They began to strike them and to go up with their forces. Then Simon and those who were with him went out of the city and set the engines of war on fire and fought against Bacchides, and he was defeated by them. They afflicted him severely, for his counsel and expedition was in vain. They were very angry with the lawless men who gave him counsel to come into the country, and they killed many of them. Then he decided to depart into his own land. Jonathan learned of this and sent ambassadors to him, to the end that they should make peace with him, and that he should restore to them the captives. He accepted the thing, and did according to his words, and swore to him that he would not seek his harm all the days of his life. He restored to him the captives which he had taken before out of the land of Judah, and he returned and departed into his own land, and didn't come any more into their borders. Thus, the sword ceased from Israel. Jonathan lived at Michmash. Jonathan began to judge the people, and he destroyed the ungodly out of Israel. Maccabees chapter 10. In the 160th year, Alexander Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus, went up and took possession of Ptolemais. They received him, and he reigned there. King Demetrius heard about this, and he gathered together exceedingly great forces, and went out to meet him in battle. Demetrius sent a letter to Jonathan with words of peace, so as to honor him. For he said, "Let's go beforehand to make peace with them, before he makes peace with Alexander against us, for he will remember all the evils that we have done against him, and to his kindred and to his nation." So, he gave him authority to gather together forces, and to provide weapons, and that he should be his ally. He also commanded that they should release the hostages that were in the citadel to him. Jonathan came to Jerusalem and read the letter in the hearing of all the people and of those who were in the citadel. They were very afraid when they heard that the king had given him authority to gather together an army. Those in the citadel released the hostages to Jonathan, and he restored them to their parents. Jonathan lived in Jerusalem and began to build and renew the city. He commanded those who did the work to build the walls and encircle Mount Zion with square stones for defense, and they did so. The foreigners who were in the strongholds which Bacchides had built fled away. Each man left his place and departed into his own land. Only at Bethsura there were left some of those who had forsaken the law and the commandments, for it was a place of refuge to them. King Alexander heard all the promises which Demetrius had sent to Jonathan. They told him of the battles and the valiant deeds which he and his kindred had done, and of the troubles which they had endured. So he said, "Could we find another man like him? Now we will make him our friend and ally." He wrote a letter and sent it to him, in these words, saying, "King Alexander to his brother Jonathan, greetings. We have heard of you, that you are a mighty man of valor, and worthy to be our friend. Now we have appointed you this day to be high priest of your nation, and to be called the king's friend, and to take our side, and to keep friendship with us." He also sent him a purple robe and a golden crown. And Jonathan put on the holy garments in the 7th month of the 160th year, at the Feast of Tabernacles, and he gathered together forces and provided weapons in abundance. When Demetrius heard these things, he was grieved and said, "What is this that we have done, that Alexander has gotten ahead of us in establishing friendship with the Jews to strengthen himself? I also will write to them words of encouragement and of honor and of gifts, that they may be with me to aid me." So he sent to them this message: "King Demetrius to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since as you have kept your covenants with us, and continued in our friendship, and have not joined yourselves to our enemies, we have heard of this, and are glad. Now continue still to keep faith with us, and we will repay you with good in return for your dealings with us. We will grant you many immunities and give you gifts. Now I free you and release all the Jews from the tributes, from the salt tax, and from the crown levies. Instead of the third part of the seed, and instead of half of the fruit of the trees, which falls to me to receive, I release it from this day and henceforth, so that I will not take it from the land of Judah. And from the 3 districts which are added to it from the country of Samaria and Galilee, from this day forth and for all time. Let Jerusalem be holy and free, with her borders, tithes, and taxes. I yield up also my authority over the citadel, which is at Jerusalem, and give it to the high priest, that he may appoint in it men whom he chooses to keep it. Every soul of the Jews who has been carried captive from the land of Judah into any part of my kingdom, I set at liberty without payment. Let all officials also cancel the taxes on their livestock. All the feasts, the Sabbaths, new moons, appointed days, 3 days before a feast, and 3 days after a feast, let them all be days of immunity and release for all the Jews who are in my kingdom. No man shall have authority to exact anything from any of them, or to trouble them concerning any matter. Let there be enrolled among the king's forces about 30,000 men of the Jews, and pay shall be given to them, as is due to all the king's forces. Of them, some shall be placed in the king's great strongholds, and some of them shall be placed over the affairs of the kingdom, which are positions of trust. Let those who are over them and their rulers be of themselves, and let them walk after their own laws, even as the king has commanded in the land of Judah. The 3 districts that have been added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be annexed to Judea, that they may be reckoned to be under one ruler, that they may not obey any other authority than the high priest. As for Ptolemais and its land, I have given it as a gift to the sanctuary that is at Jerusalem, for the expenses of the sanctuary. I also give every year 15,000 shekels of silver from the king's revenues from the places that are appropriate. And all the additional funds which those who manage the king's affairs didn't pay as in the first years, they shall give from now on toward the works of the temple. Besides this, the 5,000 shekels of silver which they received from the uses of the sanctuary from the revenue year by year is also released, because it belongs to the priests who minister there. Whoever flees to the temple that is at Jerusalem, and within all of its borders, whether one owes money to the king or any other matter, let them go free, along with all that they have in my kingdom. For the building and renewing of the structures of the sanctuary, the expense shall also be given out of the king's revenue. For the building of the walls of Jerusalem and fortifying it all around, the expense shall also be given out of the king's revenue, also for the building of the walls in Judea. Now when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they gave no credence to them, and didn't accept them, because they remembered the great evil which he had done in Israel, and that he had afflicted them very severely. They were well pleased with Alexander, because he was the first who spoke words of peace to them, and they were allies with him always. King Alexander gathered together great forces and encamped near Demetrius. The 2 kings joined battle, and the army of Alexander fled, and Demetrius followed after him and prevailed against them. He strengthened the battle exceedingly until the sun went down, and Demetrius fell that day. Alexander sent ambassadors to Ptolemy king of Egypt with this message. Since I have returned to my kingdom, and am seated on the throne of my fathers, and have established my dominion, and have overthrown Demetrius, and have taken possession of our country. Yes, I joined the battle with him, and he and his army were defeated by us. And we sat on the throne of his kingdom. Now also let's make friends with one another. Give me now your daughter as my wife. I will be joined with you and will give both you and her gifts worthy of you. Ptolemy the king answered, saying, Happy is the day you returned to the land of your ancestors and sat on the throne of their kingdom. Now I will do to you as you have written, but meet me at Ptolemais, that we may see one another, and I will join with you, even as you have said. So, Ptolemy went out of Egypt, himself and Cleopatra his daughter, and came to Ptolemais in the 162nd year. King Alexander met him, and he gave him his daughter Cleopatra, and celebrated her wedding at Ptolemais with great pomp, as kings do. King Alexander wrote to Jonathan that he should come to meet him. He went with pomp to Ptolemais and met the 2 kings. He gave them and their friends silver and gold, and many gifts, and found favor in their sight. Some malcontents out of Israel, men who were transgressors of the law, gathered together against him to complain against him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king commanded that they take off Jonathan's garments and clothe him in purple, and they did so. The king made him sit with him, and said to his princes, Go out with him into the midst of the city, and proclaim that no man may complain against him of any matter, and let no man trouble him for any reason. It came to pass, when those who complained against him saw his honor according to the proclamation, and saw him clothed in purple, they all fled away. The king gave him honor, and enrolled him among his chief friends, and made him a captain and governor of a province. Then Jonathan returned to Jerusalem with peace and gladness. In the 165th year, Demetrius, son of Demetrius, came out of Crete into the land of his ancestors. When King Alexander heard of it, he grieved exceedingly and returned to Antioch. Demetrius appointed Apollonius, who was over Coele-Syria, and he gathered together a great army, and encamped against Jamnia, and sent to Jonathan the high priest, saying, You alone lift up yourself against us, but I am ridiculed and in reproach because of you. Why do you assume authority against us in the mountains? Now therefore, if you trust in your forces, come down to us into the plain, and let's match strength with each other there, for the power of the cities is with me. Ask and learn who I am, and the rest who help us. They say, your foot can't stand before our face, for your ancestors have been put to flight twice in their own land. Now you won't be able to withstand the cavalry and such an army as this in the plain, whereas there is no stone or pebble, or place to flee. Now when Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, he was moved in his mind, and he chose 10,000 men, and went out from Jerusalem, and Simon his brother met him to help him. Then he encamped against Joppa. The people of the city shut him out because Apollonius had a garrison in Joppa. So they fought against it. The people of the city were afraid and open to him, and Jonathan became master of Joppa. Apollonius heard about that, and he gathered an army of 3,000 cavalry, and a great army, and went to Azotus as though he were on a journey, and at the same time advanced onward into the plain, because he had a multitude of cavalry which he trusted. He pursued him to Azotus, and the armies joined battle. Apollonius had secretly left 1,000 cavalry behind them. Jonathan learned that there was an ambush behind him. They surrounded his army and shot their arrows at the people from morning until evening, but the people stood fast as Jonathan commanded them, and the enemy's horses grew tired. Then Simon brought forward his army and joined battle with the phalanx, for the cavalry were exhausted, and they were defeated by him and fled. The cavalry was scattered in the plain. They fled to Azotus and entered into Beth Dagon, their idol's temple, to save themselves. Jonathan burned Azotus and the cities around it and took their spoils. He burned the temple of Dagon and those who fled into it with fire. Those who had fallen by the sword plus those who were burned were about 8,000 men. From there, Jonathan left and encamped against Ascalon. The people of the city came out to meet him with great pomp. Jonathan, with those who were on his side, returned to Jerusalem, having many spoils. It came to pass, when King Alexander heard these things, he honored Jonathan even more. He sent him a gold buckle, as the custom is to give to the king's kindred. He gave him Ekron and all its land for a possession. Maccabees chapter 11. Then the king of Egypt gathered together great forces, as the sand which is by the seashore, and many ships, and sought to make himself master of Alexander's kingdom by deceit, and to add it to his own kingdom. He went out into Syria with words of peace, and the people of the cities opened their gates to him and met him, for King Alexander's command was that they should meet him, because he was his father-in-law. Now as he entered into the cities of Ptolemais, he set his forces for a garrison in each city. But when he came near to Azotus, they showed him the temple of Dagon burned with fire, and Azotus and its pasture lands destroyed, and the bodies cast out, and those who had been burned, whom he burned in the war, for they had made heaps of them in his way. They told the king what Jonathan had done, that they might cast blame on him, but the king kept silent. Jonathan met the king with pomp at Joppa, and they greeted one another, and they slept there. Jonathan went with the king as far as the river that is called Eleutherus, then returned to Jerusalem. But King Ptolemy took control of the cities along the seacoast, to Seleucia which is by the sea, and he devised evil plans concerning Alexander. He sent ambassadors to King Demetrius, saying, "Come. Let's make a covenant with one another, and I will give you my daughter whom Alexander has, and you shall reign over your father's kingdom, for I regret that I gave my daughter to him, for he tried to kill me." He accused him, because he coveted his kingdom. Taking his daughter from him, he gave her to Demetrius, and was estranged from Alexander, and their enmity was openly seen. Ptolemy entered into Antioch and put on himself the crown of Asia. He put 2 crowns upon his head, the crown of Egypt and that of Asia. But King Alexander was in Cilicia at that time, because the people of that region were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he came against him in war. Ptolemy marched out and met him with a strong force and put him to flight. Alexander fled into Arabia, that he might be sheltered there, but King Ptolemy was triumphant. Zabdiel the Arabian took off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. King Ptolemy died the 3rd day after, and those who were in his strongholds were slain by the inhabitants of the strongholds. Demetrius became king in the 167th year. In those days Jonathan gathered together the Judeans to take the citadel that was at Jerusalem. He made many engines of war to use against it. Some lawless men who hated their own nation went to the king and reported to him that Jonathan was besieging the citadel. He heard and was angry, but when he heard it, he set out immediately and came to Ptolemais and wrote to Jonathan that he should not besiege it and that he should meet him and speak with him at Ptolemais with all speed. But when Jonathan heard this, he gave orders to continue the siege. He chose some of the elders of Israel and of the priests and put himself in peril by taking silver, gold, clothing, and various other presents and went to Ptolemais to the king. Then he found favor in his sight. Some lawless men of those who were of the nation made complaints against him, and the king did to him even as his predecessors had done to him and exalted him in the sight of all his friends and confirmed to him the high priesthood and all the other honors that he had before and gave him preeminence among his chief friends. And Jonathan requested of the king that he would make Judea free from tribute, along with the 3 provinces and the country of Samaria, and promised him 300 talents. The king consented and wrote letters to Jonathan concerning all these things as follows. King Demetrius to his brother Jonathan, and to the nation of the Jews, greetings. The copy of the letter which we wrote to Lasthenes our kinsman concerning you, we have written also to you, that you may see it. King Demetrius to Lasthenes his father, greetings. We have determined to do good to the nation of the Jews, who are our friends, and observe what is just toward us, because of their good will toward us. We have confirmed therefore to them the borders of Judea, and also the 3 governments of Apharima, Lydda, and Ramathaim. These were added to Judea from the country of Samaria, and all their territory to them, for all who do sacrifice in Jerusalem, instead of the king's dues which the king received of them yearly before from the produce of the earth and the fruits of trees. As for the other payments to us from henceforth, of the tithes and the taxes that pertain to us, and the salt pits, and the crown taxes due to us, all these we will give back to them. Not one of these grants shall be annulled from this time forth and forever. Now therefore be careful to make a copy of these things, and let it be given to Jonathan, and let it be set up on the holy mountain in a suitable and conspicuous place. When King Demetrius saw that the land was quiet before him, and that no resistance was made to him, he sent away all his troops, each man to his own place, except the foreign troops, which he had raised from the islands of the Gentiles. So, all the troops of his fathers hated him. Now Tryphon was one of those who previously had been on Alexander's side, and he saw that all the forces murmured against Demetrius. So, he went to Amalchus the Arabian, who was raising up Antiochus the young child of Alexander, and urgently insisted to him that he should deliver him to him, that he might reign in his father's place. He told him all that Demetrius had done, and the hatred with which his forces hated him, and he stayed there many days. Now Jonathan sent to King Demetrius that he should remove the troops of the citadel from Jerusalem, and the troops who were in the strongholds, for they fought against Israel continually. Demetrius sent to Jonathan, saying, I will not only do this for you and your nation, but I will greatly honor you and your nation, if I find an opportunity. Now therefore you shall do well if you send me men who will fight for me, for all my forces have revolted. So Jonathan sent him 3,000 valiant men to Antioch. They came to the king, and the king was glad at their coming. The people of the city gathered themselves together into the midst of the city, to the number of 120,000 men, and they wanted to kill the king. The king fled into the court of the palace, and the people of the city seized the main streets of the city and began to fight. The king called the Jews to help him, and they were gathered together to him all at once, and they dispersed themselves in the city and killed that day about 100,000. They set the city on fire and seized many spoils that day and saved the king. The people of the city saw that the Jews had taken control of the city as they pleased, and they became faint in their hearts. And they cried out to the king with supplication, saying, Give us your right hand, and let the Jews cease from fighting against us in the city. They threw away their weapons and made peace. The Jews were glorified in the sight of the king and before all who were in his kingdom. Then they returned to Jerusalem, having much plunder. So, King Demetrius sat on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was quiet before him. He lied in all that he spoke, and estranged himself from Jonathan, and didn't repay him according to the benefits with which he had repaid him, and treated him very harshly. Now after this, Tryphon returned, and with him the young child Antiochus, who reigned and put on a crown. All the forces which Demetrius had sent away with disgrace were gathered to him, and they fought against him, and he fled and was routed. Tryphon took the elephants and took control of Antioch. The young Antiochus wrote to Jonathan, saying, I confirm to you the high priesthood, and appoint you over the 4 districts, and to be one of the king's friends. He sent to him golden vessels and furniture for the table, and gave him permission to drink in golden vessels, and to be clothed in purple, and to have a golden buckle. He made his brother Simon governor from the ladder of Tyre to the borders of Egypt. Jonathan went out and took his journey beyond the river and through the cities. All the forces of Syria gathered themselves to him to be his allies. He came to Ascalon, and the people of the city met him honorably. He departed from there to Gaza, and the people of Gaza shut him out. So, he besieged it and burned its pasture lands with fire and plundered them. The people of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan, and he gave them his right hand, and took the sons of their princes for hostages, and sent them away to Jerusalem. Then he passed through the country as far as Damascus. Then Jonathan heard that Demetrius's princes had come to Kedesh, which is in Galilee, with a great army, intending to remove him from his office. He went to meet them, but he left Simon, his brother, in the country. Simon encamped against Bethsura and fought against it for many days and hemmed it in. They asked him to give them his right hand, and he gave it to them. He removed them from there, took possession of the city, and set a garrison over it. Jonathan and his army encamped at the water of Gennesareth, and early in the morning they marched to the plain of Hazor. Behold, an army of foreigners met him in the plain. They laid an ambush for him in the mountains, but they themselves met him face to face. But those who lay in ambush rose out of their places and joined battle. All those who were on Jonathan's side fled. Not one of them was left, except Mattathias the son of Absalom, and Judas the son of Chalphi, captains of the forces. Jonathan tore his clothes, put dirt on his head, and prayed. He turned again to them in battle, and routed them, and they fled. When the men on his side who had fled saw this, they returned to him and pursued with him to Kedesh to their camp, and they encamped there. About 3,000 men of the foreigners fell on that day. Then Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. Maccabees chapter 12. Jonathan saw that the time was favorable for him, so he chose men and sent them to Rome to confirm and renew the friendship that they had with them. He also sent similar letters to the Spartans and to other places. They went to Rome, entered into the Senate house, and said, Jonathan the high priest and the nation of the Jews have sent us to renew for them the friendship and the alliance, as in former time. They gave them letters to the men in every place, that they should provide safe conduct for them on their way to the land of Judah. This is the copy of the letters which Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. Jonathan the high priest, and the senate of the nation, and the priests, and the rest of the people of the Jews, to their kindred the Spartans, greetings. Even before this time, letters were sent to Onias the high priest from Arius, who was reigning among you, to signify that you are our kindred, as the copy written below shows. Onias welcomed honorably the man who was sent and received the letters, wherein declaration was made of alliance and friendship. Therefore, we also, even though we need none of these things, having for our encouragement the holy books which are in our hands, have undertaken to send that we might renew our brotherhood and friendship with you. To the end that we should not become estranged from you altogether, for a long time has passed since you sent your letter to us. We therefore at all times without ceasing, both in our feasts and on the other convenient days, remember you in the sacrifices which we offer, and in our prayers, as it is right and proper to be mindful of kindred. Moreover, we are glad for your glory. But as for ourselves, many afflictions and many wars have encompassed us, and the kings who are around us have fought against us. We were unwilling to be troublesome to you, and to the rest of our allies and friends, in these wars, for we have the help which is from heaven to help us, and we have been delivered from our enemies, and our enemies have been humbled. We chose therefore Numenius the son of Antiochus, and Antipater the son of Jason, and have sent them to the Romans, to renew the friendship that we had with them, and the former alliance. We commanded them therefore to go also to you, and to salute you, and to deliver you our letters concerning the renewing of friendship and our brotherhood. And now you will do well if you give us a reply. And this is the copy of the letters which they sent to Onias. Arius king of the Spartans to Onias the chief priest, greetings. It has been found in writing, concerning the Spartans and the Jews, that they are kindred, and that they are of the descendants of Abraham. Now, since this has come to our knowledge, you will do well to write to us of your prosperity. We moreover write on our part to you, that your livestock and goods are ours, and ours are yours. We do command therefore that they make report to you accordingly. Now Jonathan heard that Demetrius's princes had returned to fight against him with a greater army than before, so he marched away from Jerusalem and met them in the country of Hamath, for he gave them no opportunity to set foot in his country. He sent spies into his camp, and they came again and reported to him that they were preparing to attack them at night. But as soon as the sun was down, Jonathan commanded his men to watch and to be armed, that all the night long they might be ready for battle. He stationed sentinels around the camp. The adversaries heard that Jonathan and his men were ready for battle, and they feared and trembled in their hearts, and they kindled fires in their camp, then withdrew. But Jonathan and his men didn't know it until the morning, for they saw the fires burning. Jonathan pursued after them but didn't overtake them, for they had gone over the river Eleutherus. Then Jonathan turned toward the Arabians, who are called Zabadians, and struck them, and took their spoils. He came out from there, and came to Damascus, and took his journey through all the country. Simon went out, and took his journey as far as Ascalon, and the strongholds that were near it. Then he turned toward Joppa and took possession of it, for he had heard that they were planning to hand over the stronghold to Demetrius's men. He set a garrison there to guard it. Then Jonathan returned and called the elders of the people together. He planned with them to build strongholds in Judea, and to make the walls of Jerusalem higher, and to raise a great mound between the citadel and the city, to separate it from the city, that so it might be isolated, that its garrison might neither buy nor sell. They were gathered together to build the city. Part of the wall of the brook that is on the east side fell down, and he repaired the section called Chaphanatha. Simon also built Adida in the plain country, made it strong, and set up gates and bars. And Tryphon sought to reign over Asia and to crown himself, and to stretch out his hand against Antiochus the king. He was afraid that Jonathan wouldn't allow him, and that he would fight against him, and he sought a way to seize him, that he might destroy him. So, he marched out and came to Bethshan. Jonathan came out to meet him with 40,000 men chosen for battle, and came to Bethshan. Tryphon saw that he came with a great army, and he was afraid to stretch out his hand against him. He received him honorably, and commended him to all his friends, and gave him gifts, and commanded his forces to be obedient to him, as to himself. He said to Jonathan, "Why have you put all these people to so much trouble, seeing there is no war between us? Now send them away to their homes, but choose for yourself a few men who shall be with you, and come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it to you, and the rest of the strongholds and the rest of the forces, and all the king's officers. Then I will turn around and depart, for this is why I came." He put his trust in him, and did even as he said, and sent away his forces, and they departed into the land of Judah. But he reserved to himself 3,000 men, of whom he left 2,000 in Galilee, but 1,000 went with him. Now as soon as Jonathan entered into Ptolemais, the people of Ptolemais shut the gates and seized him. They killed all those who came in with him with the sword. Tryphon sent troops and cavalry into Galilee and into the great plain to destroy all Jonathan's men. They perceived that he had been seized and had perished, along with those who were with him. They encouraged one another and went on their way close together, prepared to fight. Those who followed them saw that they were ready to fight for their lives and turned back again. They all came in peace into the land of Judah, and they mourned for Jonathan and those who were with him, and they were very afraid. All Israel mourned with a great mourning. And all the Gentiles who were around them sought to destroy them utterly, for they said, "They have no ruler nor anyone to help them. Now therefore let's fight against them and take away their memory from among men." Maccabees chapter 13. Simon heard that Tryphon had gathered together a mighty army to come into the land of Judah and destroy it completely. He saw that the people were trembling in great fear. So, he went up to Jerusalem and gathered the people together. He encouraged them and said to them, "You yourselves know all the things that I and my kindred and my father's house have done for the laws and the sanctuary and the battles and the distresses which we have seen. Because of this, all my brothers have perished for Israel's sake, and I am left alone. Now be it far from me that I should spare my own life in any time of affliction, for I am not better than my kindred. However, I will take vengeance for my nation, for the sanctuary, and for our wives and children, because all the Gentiles have gathered out of hatred to destroy us." The spirit of the people revived as soon as they heard these words. They answered with a loud voice, saying, "You are our leader in the place of Judas and Jonathan your brothers. Fight our battles, and we will do all that you tell us to do." He gathered together all the men of war and hurried to finish the walls of Jerusalem. He fortified it all around. He sent Jonathan the son of Absalom, and with him a great army, to Joppa. He threw out those who were in it and lived there. Tryphon left Ptolemais with a mighty army to enter into the land of Judah, and Jonathan was with him under guard. But Simon encamped at Adida, near the plain. Tryphon knew that Simon had risen up in the place of his brother Jonathan and meant to join battle with him, so he sent ambassadors to him, saying, "It is for money which Jonathan your brother owed to the king's treasury, by reason of the offices which he had, that we are detaining him. Now send 100 talents of silver and 2 of his sons for hostages, so that when he is released, he may not revolt against us, and we will release him." Simon knew that they spoke to him deceitfully, but he sent to get the money and the children, lest perhaps he would arouse great hostility among the people, who might say, "Because I didn't send him the money and the children, he perished." So he sent the children and the 100 talents, but Tryphon lied and didn't release Jonathan. After this, Tryphon came to invade the land and destroy it, and he went around by the way that leads to Adora. Simon and his army marched near him to every place, wherever he went. Now the people of the citadel sent to Tryphon ambassadors, urging him to come to them through the wilderness and to send them food. So Tryphon prepared all his cavalry to come, but on that night a very heavy snow fell, and he didn't come because of the snow. He marched off and went into the land of Gilead. When he came near to Boscama, he killed Jonathan, and he was buried there. Then Tryphon turned back and went away into his own land. Simon sent and took the bones of Jonathan, his brother, and buried him at Madan, the city of his fathers. All Israel made great lamentation over him and mourned for him many days. Simon built a monument on the tomb of his father and his kindred, and raised it high, so that it could be seen, with polished stone on the front and back. He also set up 7 pyramids, one near another, for his father, his mother, and his 4 brothers. For these, he made an elaborate setting, erecting great pillars around them, and upon the pillars he made suits of armor for a perpetual memorial, and beside the suits of armor, he carved ships, so that they could be seen by all who sail on the sea. This is the tomb which he made at Madan. It remains to this day. Now Tryphon deceived the young king Antiochus and killed him and reigned in his place. He put on himself the crown of Asia and brought a great calamity upon the land. Simon built up the strongholds of Judea and walled them all around with high towers, great walls, gates, and bars, and he stored food in the strongholds. Simon chose men and sent to King Demetrius with a request that he grant the country an immunity, because all that Tryphon did was to plunder. King Demetrius sent to him according to these words, and answered him, and wrote a letter to him, as follows. King Demetrius to Simon the high priest and friend of kings, and to the elders and nation of the Jews, greetings. The golden crown and the palm branch, which you sent, we have received. We are ready to make a steadfast peace with you, yes, and to write to our officers to release you from tribute. Whatever things we confirm to you, they are confirmed. The strongholds which you have built, let them be your own. As for any oversights and faults committed to this day, we forgive them, and the crown tax which you owed us. If there were any other tax collected in Jerusalem, let it be collected no longer. If any among you are qualified to be enrolled in our court, let them be enrolled, and let there be peace between us. In the 170th year, the yoke of the Gentiles was taken away from Israel. The people began to write in their instruments and contracts, in the first year of Simon, the great high priest and captain and leader of the Jews. In those days Simon encamped against Gazara and surrounded it with troops. He made a siege engine and brought it up to the city and struck a tower and captured it. Those who were in the engine leaped out into the city, and there was a great uproar in the city. The people of the city tore their clothes and went up on the walls with their wives and children and cried with a loud voice, asking Simon to give them his right hand. They said, "Don't deal with us according to our wickedness, but according to your mercy." So, Simon was reconciled to them and didn't fight against them, but he expelled them from the city and cleansed the houses where the idols were, and then entered into it with singing and giving praise. He removed all uncleanness out of it, and placed in it men who would keep the law, and made it stronger than it was before, and built a dwelling place for himself in it. But the people of the citadel in Jerusalem were hindered from going out and from going into the country, and from buying and selling. So, they were very hungry, and a great number of them perished from famine. Then they cried out to Simon that he should give them his right hand, and he gave it to them, but he expelled them from there, and he cleansed the citadel from its pollutions. He entered into it on the 23rd day of the second month, in the 171st year, with praise and palm branches, with harps, with cymbals, and with stringed instruments, with hymns, and with songs, because a great enemy had been destroyed out of Israel. Simon ordained that they should keep that day every year with gladness. He made the hill of the temple that was by the citadel stronger than before, and he lived there with his men. Simon saw that his son John was a man, so he made him leader of all his forces, and he lived in Gazara. Maccabees chapter 14. In the 172nd year, King Demetrius gathered his forces together and went into Media to get help, that he might fight against Tryphon. When Arsaces, the king of Persia and Media, heard that Demetrius had come into his borders, he sent one of his princes to take him alive. He went and struck the army of Demetrius and seized him and brought him to Arsaces, who put him under guard. The land had rest all the days of Simon. He sought the good of his nation. His authority and his honor were pleasing to them all his days. Amid all his honors, he took Joppa for a harbor and made it an entrance for the islands of the sea. He enlarged the borders of his nation and took possession of the country. He gathered together a great number of captives and took control of Gazara, Bethsura, and the citadel, and he removed its uncleannesses from it. There was no one who resisted him. They tilled their land in peace, and the land gave her increase, and the trees of the plains gave their fruit. The old men sat in the streets, they all conversed together about good things. The young men put on glorious and warlike apparel. He provided food for the cities and furnished them with means of defense until the glory of his name was known to the end of the earth. He made peace in the land, and Israel rejoiced with great joy. Each man sat under his vine and his fig tree, and there was no one to make them afraid. No one was left in the land who fought against them. The kings were defeated in those days. He strengthened all those of his people who were humble. He searched out the law, and every lawless and wicked person he took away. He glorified the sanctuary and added to it the vessels of the temple. It was heard at Rome that Jonathan was dead, and even in Sparta, and they were exceedingly grieved. But as soon as they heard that his brother Simon was made high priest in his place and ruled the country and the cities in it, they wrote to him on brass tablets to renew with him the friendship and the alliance which they had confirmed with his brothers Judas and Jonathan. These were read before the congregation at Jerusalem. This is the copy of the letters which the Spartans sent. The rulers in the city of the Spartans, to Simon the high priest, to the elders, the priests, and the rest of the people of the Jews, our kindred, greetings. The ambassadors who were sent to our people reported to us about your glory and honor. We were glad for their coming, and we registered the things that were spoken by them in the public records as follows. Numenius son of Antiochus and Antipater son of Jason, the Jews' ambassadors, came to us to renew the friendship they had with us. It pleased the people to entertain the men honorably and to put the copy of their words in the public records, to the end that the people of the Spartans might have a record of them. Moreover, they wrote a copy of these things to Simon the high priest. After this, Simon sent Numenius to Rome with a great shield of gold weighing 1,000 minas, in order to confirm the alliance with them. But when the people heard these things, they said, "What thanks shall we give to Simon and his sons? For he and his brothers and the house of his father have made themselves strong, and have fought and chased away Israel's enemies, and confirmed liberty to Israel." So they wrote on tablets of brass and set them on pillars on Mount Zion. This is the copy of the writing. On the 18th day of Elul, in the 172nd year, which is the 3rd year of Simon the high priest, in Asaramal, in a great congregation of priests and people and princes of the nation, and of the elders of the country, it was proclaimed to us. Since wars often occurred in the country, Simon the son of Mattathias, the son of the sons of Joarib, and his brothers put themselves in jeopardy and withstood the enemies of their nation, that their sanctuary and the law might be established, and glorified their nation with great glory. Jonathan rallied the nation, became their high priest, and was gathered to his people. Their enemies planned to invade their country, that they might destroy their country utterly, and stretch out their hands against their sanctuary. Then Simon rose up and fought for his nation. He spent much of his own money to arm the valiant men of his nation, and give them wages. He fortified the cities of Judea and Bethsura that lies on the borders of Judea, where the weapons of the enemies had been stored, and there he placed a garrison of Jews. He fortified Joppa, which is upon the sea, and Gazara, which is upon the borders of Azotus, where the enemies used to live, and placed Jews there, and set in there all things necessary for their restoration. The people saw Simon's faith and the glory which he resolved to bring to his nation, and they made him their leader and high priest, because he had done all these things, and for the justice and the faith which he kept to his nation, and because he sought by all means to exalt his people. In his days, things prospered in his hands, so that the Gentiles were taken away out of their country, and they also who were in the city of David, those who were in Jerusalem, who had made themselves a citadel, out of which they used to go, and polluted everything around the sanctuary, and did great damage to its purity. He placed Jews in it and fortified it for the safety of the country and the city, and made high the walls of Jerusalem. King Demetrius confirmed to him the high priesthood according to these things, and made him one of his friends, and honored him with great honor, for he had heard that the Jews had been called by the Romans friends, allies, and kindred, and that they had met the ambassadors of Simon honorably, and that the Jews and the priests were well pleased that Simon should be their leader and high priest forever, until there should arise a faithful prophet, and that he should be governor over them, and should take charge of the sanctuary, to set them over their works, and over the country, and over the weapons, and over the strongholds. And that he should take charge of the sanctuary, and that he should be obeyed by all, and that all contracts in the country should be written in his name, and that he should be clothed in purple, and wear gold, and that it should not be lawful for any of the people or of the priests to nullify any of these things, or to oppose the words that he should speak, or to gather an assembly in the country without him, or to be clothed in purple, or wear a buckle of gold, but whoever should do otherwise, or nullify any of these things, he will be liable to punishment. All the people consented to ordain Simon that he should do according to these words. So Simon accepted this, and consented to be high priest, and to be captain and governor of the Jews and of the priests, and to be protector of all. They commanded to put this writing on tablets of brass, and to set them up within the precinct of the sanctuary in a conspicuous place, and moreover to put copies of them in the treasury, so that Simon and his sons might have them. Maccabees chapter 15. Antiochus son of Demetrius the king sent a letter from the islands of the sea to Simon the priest and governor of the Jews, and to all the nation. Its contents follow. King Antiochus to Simon the chief priest and governor, and to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Whereas certain troublemakers have made themselves masters of the kingdom of our fathers, but my purpose is to claim the kingdom, that I may restore it as it was before, and moreover I have raised a multitude of foreign soldiers and have prepared warships, moreover I plan to land in the country, that I may punish those who have destroyed our country and those who have made many cities in the kingdom desolate. Now therefore I confirm to you all the tax remissions which the kings who were before me remitted to you, and whatever gifts besides they remitted to you, and I permit you to coin money for your country with your own stamp, but that Jerusalem and the sanctuary should be free. All the weapons that you have prepared and the strongholds that you have built, which you have in your possession, let them remain yours. Every debt owed to the king, and the things that will be owed to the king from henceforth and forevermore, let them be remitted to you. Moreover, when we have established our kingdom, we will glorify you and your nation and the temple with great glory, so that your glory will be made manifest in all the earth. In the 174th year, Antiochus went into the land of his fathers, and all the forces came together to him, so that there were few men with Tryphon. King Antiochus pursued him, and he came, as he fled, to Dor, which is by the sea, for he knew that troubles had come upon him all at once, and that his forces had deserted him. Antiochus encamped against Dor, and with him 120,000 men of war and 8,000 cavalry. He surrounded the city, and the ships joined in the attack from the sea. He harassed the city by land and sea, and permitted no one to go out or in. Numenius and his company came from Rome, having letters to the kings and to the countries, in which were written these things. Lucius, consul of the Romans, to King Ptolemy, greetings. The Jews' ambassadors came to us as our friends and allies, to renew the old friendship and alliance, being sent from Simon the high priest, and from the people of the Jews. Moreover, they brought a shield of gold weighing 1,000 minas. It pleased us therefore to write to the kings and to the countries, that they should not seek their harm or fight against them, their cities and their country, or be allies with those who fight against them. Moreover, it seemed good to us to receive the shield from them. If therefore any troublemakers have fled from their country to you, deliver them to Simon the high priest, that he may take vengeance on them according to their law. He wrote the same things to King Demetrius, to Attalus, to Arathes, to Arsaces, to all the countries, to Sampsams, to the Spartans, to Delos, to Mindos, to Sicyon, to Caria, to Samos, to Pamphylia, to Lycia, to Halicarnassus, to Rhodes, to Phasaelus, to Cos, to Side, to Aretus, Gortyna, Cnidus, Cyprus, and Cyrene. They also wrote this copy to Simon the high priest. But King Antiochus encamped against Dor the second day, bringing his forces up to it continually, and making engines of war, and he shut up Tryphon from going in or out. Simon sent him 2,000 chosen men to fight on his side, with silver, gold, and instruments of war in abundance. He would not receive them, but nullified all the covenants which he had made with him before and was estranged from him. He sent to him Athenobius, one of his friends, to confer with him, saying, "You hold possession of Joppa, Gazara, and the citadel that is in Jerusalem, cities of my kingdom. You have devastated their territory and done great harm in the land and control of many places in my kingdom. Now therefore hand over the cities which you have taken and the tributes of the places which you have taken control of outside of the borders of Judea, or else give me for them 500 talents of silver, and for the harm that you have done, and for the tributes of the cities, another 500 talents. Otherwise, we will come and subdue you." Athenobius, the king's friend, came to Jerusalem. When he saw the glory of Simon, the cupboard of gold and silver vessels, and his great attendants, he was amazed. He reported to him the king's words. Simon answered and said to him, "We have not taken other men's land, nor do we have possession of that which belongs to others, but of the inheritance of our fathers. However, it had been in possession of our enemies wrongfully for a while. But we, having opportunity, firmly hold the inheritance of our fathers. As for Joppa and Gazara, which you demand, they did great harm to the people throughout our country. We will give 100 talents for them." Athenobius didn't answer even one word, but returned in a rage to the king and reported to him these words and the glory of Simon and all that he had seen, and the king was exceedingly angry. Meanwhile, Tryphon embarked on board a ship and fled to Orthosia. The king appointed Syndebius chief captain of the seacoast and gave him troops of infantry and cavalry. He commanded him to encamp against Judea, and he commanded him to build up Kidron and to fortify the gates, and that he should fight against the people, but the king pursued Tryphon. So Syndebius came to Jamnia and began to provoke the people and to invade Judea and to take the people captive and kill them. He built Kidron and stationed cavalry and infantry there, to the end that going out they might make raids on the highways of Judea, as the king had commanded him. Maccabees chapter 16. John went up from Gazara and told Simon, his father, what Syndebius was doing. Simon called his two oldest sons, Judas and John, and said to them, I and my brothers in my father's house have fought the battles of Israel from our youth, even to this day, and things have prospered in our hands, that we have often delivered Israel. But now I am old, and you moreover, by his mercy, are of a sufficient age. Take the place of me and my brother and go out and fight for our nation, and let the help which is from heaven be with you. He chose out of the country 20,000 men of war and cavalry, and they went against Syndebius and slept at Madan. Rising up in the morning, they went into the plain, and behold, a great army of infantry and cavalry came to meet them. There was a brook between them. He encamped near them, he and his people. He saw that the people were afraid to pass over the brook, and he passed over first. When the men saw him, they passed over after him. He divided the people and placed the cavalry in the midst of the infantry, but the enemy's cavalry was exceedingly many. They sounded the trumpets, and Syndebius and his army were put to flight, and many of them fell wounded to death, but those who were left fled to the stronghold. At that time Judas, John's brother, was wounded, but John pursued after them until he came to Kidron, which Syndebius had built. They fled to the towers that are in the fields of Azotus, and he burned it with fire. About 2,000 men of them fell. Then he returned to Judea in peace. Ptolemy the son of Abubus had been appointed governor over the plain of Jericho, and he had much silver and gold, for he was the high priest's son-in-law. His heart was lifted up, and he planned to make himself master of the country, and he made deceitful plans against Simon and his sons to do away with them. Now Simon was visiting the cities that were in the country and attending to their needs. He went down to Jericho himself with Mattathias and Judas his sons in the 177th year, in the 11th month, which is the month of Sebet. The son of Abubus received them deceitfully into the little stronghold that is called Doc, which he had built, and made them a great banquet, and hid men there. When Simon and his sons had drunk freely, Ptolemy and his men rose up, took their weapons, rushed in against Simon in the banqueting place, and killed him, his two sons, and some of his servants. He committed great iniquity and repaid evil for good. Ptolemy wrote these things and sent to the king, that he should send him forces to aid him, and should deliver him their country and the cities. He sent others to Gazara to do away with John. To the captains of thousands, he sent letters to come to him, that he might give them silver, gold, and gifts. He sent others to take possession of Jerusalem and the Temple Hill. One ran before to Gazara and told John that his father and kindred had perished, and he has sent to kill you also. When he heard, he was greatly shocked. He seized the men who came to destroy him and killed them, for he perceived that they were seeking to destroy him. And the rest of the acts of John and of his wars and of his valiant deeds which he did, and of the building of the walls which he built, and of his achievements, behold, they are written in the chronicles of his high priesthood, from the time that he was made high priest after his father. 1 Maccabees chapter 2. In those days rose up Mattathias the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, from Jerusalem, and he lived at Madan. And he had 5 sons, John, who was surnamed Gaddis, Simon, who was called Thassi, Judas, who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar, who was called Avron, Jonathan, who was called Aphus. And he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and in Jerusalem. And he said, Woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see the destruction of my people, and the destruction of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was given into the hand of the enemy, the sanctuary into the hand of aliens? Her temple is become as a man that was glorious. Her vessels of glory are carried away into captivity, Her infants are slain in her streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation has not inherited her palaces and gotten possession of her spoils? Her adorning is all taken away, instead of a free woman she is become a bondwoman. And, behold, our holy things and our beauty and our glory are laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned them. Wherefore should we live any longer? And Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes and put on sackcloth and mourned exceedingly. And the king's officers that were enforcing the apostasy came into the city Madan to sacrifice. And many of Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were gathered together. And the king's officers answered and spoke to Mattathias, saying, You are a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and kindred. Now therefore come you first and do the commandment of the king, as all the nations have done, and the men of Judah, and those who remain in Jerusalem. And you and your house shall be in the number of the king's friends, and you and your sons shall be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. And Mattathias answered and said with a loud voice, If all the nations that are in the house of the king's dominion listen to him, to fall away each one from the worship of his fathers, and have made choice to follow his commandments. Yet I and my sons and my kindred will walk in the covenant of our fathers. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not listen to the king's words, to go aside from our worship, on the right hand, or on the left. And when he had left speaking these words, there came a Jew in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Madan, according to the king's commandment. And Mattathias saw it, and his zeal was kindled, and his reins trembled, and he showed forth his wrath according to judgment, and ran, and killed him upon the altar. And the king's officer, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and pulled down the altar. And he was zealous for the law, even as Phinehas did to Zimri the son of Salu. And Mattathias cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, Whosoever is zealous for the law, and maintains the covenant, let him come forth after me. And he and his sons fled into the mountains, and forsook all that they had in the city. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there. They, and their sons, and their wives, and their cattle, because evils were multiplied upon them. And it was told the king's officers, and the forces that were in Jerusalem, the city of David, that certain men, who had broken the king's commandment, were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness. And many pursued after them, and having overtaken them, they encamped against them, and set the battle in array against them on the Sabbath day. And they said to them, Thus far. Come forth, and do according to the word of the king, and you shall live. And they said, We will not come forth, neither will we do the word of the king, to profane the Sabbath day. And they hurried to give them battle. And they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped up the secret places. Saying, Let us die all in our innocency. Heaven and earth witness over us, that you put us to death without trial. And they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they died, they and their wives and their children, and their cattle, to the number of 1,000 souls. And Mattathias and his friends knew it, and they mourned over them exceedingly. And one said to another, If we all do as our kindred have done, and fight not against the Gentiles for our lives and our ordinances, they will now quickly destroy us from off the earth. And they took counsel on that day, saying, Whoever shall come against us to battle on the Sabbath day, let's fight against him, and we shall in no wise all die, as our kindred died in the secret places. Then were gathered together to them a company of Hasidians, mighty men of Israel, every one that offered himself willingly for the law. And all those who fled from the evils were added to them, and became a state of them. And they mustered an army, and struck sinners in their anger, and lawless men in their wrath. And the rest fled to the Gentiles for safety. And Mattathias and his friends went round about, and pulled down the altars. And they circumcised by force the children that were uncircumcised, as many as they found in the coasts of Israel. And they pursued after the sons of pride, and the work prospered in their hand. And they rescued the law out of the hand of the Gentiles, and out of the hand of the kings, neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. And the days of Mattathias drew near that he should die, and he said to his sons, Now have pride and rebuke gotten strength, and a season of overthrow and wrath of indignation. And now, my children, be you zealous for the law, and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. And call to remembrance the deeds of our fathers which they did in their generations, and receive great glory and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in temptation, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness? Joseph in the time of his distress kept the commandment, and became Lord of Egypt. Phinehas our father, for that he was zealous exceedingly, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Joshua for fulfilling the word became a judge in Israel. Caleb for bearing witness in the congregation obtained a heritage in the land. David for being merciful inherited the throne of a kingdom forever and ever. Elijah, for that he was exceeding zealous for the law, was taken up into heaven. Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, believed, and were saved out of the flame. Daniel for his innocency was delivered from the mouth of lions. And thus consider you from generation to generation, that none that put their trust in him shall lack for strength. And be not afraid of the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall in no wise be found, because he is returned to his dust, and his thought is perished. And you, my children, be strong, and show yourselves men in behalf of the law, for therein shall you obtain glory. And, behold, Simon your brother, I know that he is a man of counsel, give ear to him always. He shall be a father to you. And Judas Maccabeus, he has been strong and mighty from his youth. He shall be your captain, and shall fight the battle of the people. And take you to you all the doers of the law, and avenge the wrong of your people. Render a recompense to the Gentiles, and take heed to the commandments of the law. And he blessed them, and was gathered to his fathers. And he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchres of his fathers at Matan, and all Israel made great lamentation for him.